Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is a history of the world. Now, there are two theories of history. One is linear and the other is circular. Linear history believes that the farther one goes back in time, the more primitive the world was. In other words, if you go back in time 10,000 years, 20,000 years, that there was no farming, that people were hunting animals, and very small population for the whole world, and people living subsistence lives, very, very difficult lives, just, and not having much, just struggling to survive. And then as the passage of time, the farming was developed according to circular theory and linear theory in what's now Iraq, and that really led to the development of civilization. Now and according to linear theory, today's world is the most advanced that the world has ever been in terms of technology and so forth, with all the things we have. And so modern man feels, oh, look how great I am, look how great we are. And the people in the past, they were all, primitive, stupid and ignorant and so forth. But today we're so advanced. Now, circular theory is very different. It believes in cycles, that the world goes through cycles of 22,000 years. And in one cycle, there's 11,000 years of progress, things getting better, improvement, and then 11,000 years of decay, deterioration, and the world goes up and down. According to circular theory, if we went back in time 13,000 years, the world was much more advanced than it is today in terms of technology and human behavior and so forth. And you see some of this, and it's fictionalized in Star Trek, where they have medicine in the future. That's first the future. I'm talking about the past now. Okay, so circular theory. So, and then in this theory, a bottom of a cycle was reached about 500 AD. So today we are around 2019. We're about 1,500 years from the bottom of a cycle, moving upward, moving toward a higher age. Anyway, I believe circular theory. This is what I believe. Most historians do not, and most historians are based on the tradition from Great Britain, and Great Britain, which is this country dominated by England, including Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the British created the greatest empire in modern times, the British Empire, and huge parts of the world were conquered by the British. The United States, Canada, a huge part of Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, and many, many other places, Hong Kong, and so forth. And the British, thought, look how great we are. And actually, the British were pretty great, relatively great, because they developed rule of law, they developed the use of reason and information, and democracy, modern democracy, developed in around 1200, the Magna Carta, where governments needed to be accountable to the people, and parliament, and have elected officials and so forth, instead of the tradition of kings, might makes right. I'm the king, I can do whatever I want. So anyway, the British thought, look how great we are, and they studied history, and they thought, this is the greatest the world has ever been. And so most historians see the problem with, one of the problems in life is that when many people are wrong, and they're all wrong, and the thing is, historians don't want to admit that they're wrong. And if you watch that there have been past high ages, much more advanced than today's world. If you watch the television show Ancient Aliens, they have every episode has evidence of anomalies. I think, oh my gosh, there's things that they can't explain that appear to be evidence of more advanced civilizations in the past. Some of these, stone structures, they think, wow, how did they do this? They didn't have the technology, and so forth. So anyway, under circular theory, we believe circular theorists for world history believe 13,000 years ago the world was highly advanced, very highly advanced, and there were two great civilizations, Atlantis, two great actually continents that disappeared, Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean and Lemuria in the Pacific Ocean. And the world there were still problems. There's always troublemakers, people, up to no good. But generally, the world was more peaceful and more wisdom and so forth. And then, since the cycles go up and down, those two continents disappeared. I believe about around 10,000 years ago, something like that. They both disappeared. And when they disappeared, you think, well, how can a continent disappear? Well, the surface of the Earth is not stable. The interior of the Earth is not stable. There are these plates that are moving on the surface, and the interior has gas chambers and so forth. Think of these sinkholes where people's homes just disappear all of a sudden. Wow, some people have died. They never found the body because the house just disappears into the earth. And so anyway, these circular theorists believe that Atlantis and Lemuria disappeared, and after they disappeared, India became the repository of ancient wisdom. And actually the Philippines was a remnant of Lemuria. You look at the Filipino people, they're amazing people. They smile, they're very patient, very spiritual, hardworking, good people, wonderful people, amazing people, and they're all over the world now. And I believe Filipinos are helping to lead the world toward a higher age because of their wonderful spirit. And they have this, when things go wrong, they smile. Wonderful people, very spiritual people. One of the ironies of the Spanish conquest, Spanish were Christian in name, but they really weren't practicing Christianity, although the Filipinos were, even if they didn't know Jesus Christ. Well, I'm getting off the topic here. Because they were practicing Christian living. In other words, knowledge of a great being, and also a sense of being kind and so forth. And now the another remnant of Atlantis was ancient Greece. Now, see, the ancient Greeks were incredible. In fact, you could say the modern world came from them. How did such an amazing people come out of nothing? Well, and actually, the ancient Greeks talk about Atlantis, in their writings. And then people say, oh, it was just a myth. Well, I don't believe it was a myth. The ancient Greeks were extremely advanced. They developed democracy. They had the Olympic Games. And tremendous thinkers: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Homer, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and tremendous, very talented people. So anyway, now let's go into a little geography. Now, the Earth has four main large land forms, right? You got North America, South America, Eurasia, and then Africa, right? And then, of course, the two huge oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. What's that? Okay, so anyway, now if we went back in time, those four land masses, three of the four are modest in size, and all four were really isolated from each other, right? Because North and South America, the Isthmus of Panama is very tiny, right? So basically, North America, South America were, and then Africa was really isolated as well, because you have the Mediterranean Sea and the Sahara Desert, which isolated sub-Saharan Africa. And then the most important, really, landmass was Eurasia, because all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, from Spain and Portugal and France, all the way to the east coast of China on the Pacific Ocean. Huge landmass. And that really was the most important, or has been the most important landmass in history. Now, the interesting thing in life, we need to eat. The struggle for food is of prime importance. And primarily in history, people have been, eating plants, agriculture. Now, plants require a certain climate. And climates, as you go north-south, climates change because of the distance from the equator. But if you go east-west, climates stay the same. So in the Eurasian landmass, you had a huge east-west landmass, which meant that people could develop, a certain plant for food in an area, and then it could spread all the way across. Now, unlike Africa and North and South America, you didn't have that vast space, east to west. Okay, so basically, now we get to the about, let's say, more than 2,000 years ago, the development of the Roman Empire in Europe, and actually to a large extent based on contribution of the Greeks. And, this is, and several things were going on. The ancient Greeks go back BC, And then the people of Israel, the Jewish people in what's now Israel, the Jewish people developed a very small kingdom. And then the Roman Empire, which is based on the city of Rome in Italy. Much of Europe became a part of this vast empire. And then North Africa into parts of the Middle East. And with a huge contribution from the Greeks, who some of whom were enslaved. But they made major contributions because they were very brilliant. Now, the other empires were China and India, are great powers. In fact, China and India are the two countries that are very large and very ancient and have been powerful in the past, became weak, and then have become powerful again in modern times. China and India. I can't really think of any others. Other empires have just completely disappeared. The history of North and South America, boy, we just know so little, because when European contact came in 1492, extensive European contact, after Christopher Columbus's incredible voyage across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, then the populations in North and South America fell by, we don't even know, it could have been more than 90% of the people died, mostly because of diseases that they didn't have immunity. So, and all we know is when the Europeans arrived, it was the Aztec Empire in Mexico, which was dominant, and the Inca Empire in South America, which was also dominant. But who knows how many empires had come and gone. And there were many smaller empires in what's now the United States and other parts of North and South America. So anyway, the Roman Empire developed around, going back BC 2500, for a little around that time. Very, very powerful empire. And then you had China actually was becoming powerful, and India. And then, as I said, the Greeks were major contributors. And then there was a Jewish fellow named Jesus who was from the city of Nazareth, died in Jerusalem. He only had 12 followers, but he was a great saint. He started a religion, Christianity. Of course, in India had before Christianity was very spiritual. In fact, there are scholars who believe Jesus actually traveled to India and studied there with Indian saints. And India had Lord Krishna, who was a saint king. And then, of course, India was very spiritual. And then Lord Buddha came later. Lord Buddha, who kind of revived, the longer time passes after a saint dies, his influence diminishes. And so then most of Asia became Buddhist because of Lord Buddha from India, who spread Buddhism to China and Japan and so forth. Anyway, so now the Roman Empire, Christianity developed. There was this people Jesus Christ was a great saint, wonderful man, and he had a message of love, loving God, loving your neighbor, right? And the thing is, Christianity. Yes, we know Christians haven't been Christian, but the ideal is always there, and Christianity started spreading within the Roman Empire. And actually the Greeks really were the ones who spread it the most, because they were an advanced people, and they thought, wow, this Christianity, this is really good, and this is even better than what we have. They had Stoicism. One of the ironies, and early on there were problems because the Christians refused to serve in the military. They thought, no, we're against all war. And they were persecuted in large part because of that. In fact, Marcus Aurelius, very tragic, he persecuted Christians because and he was a great Stoic, and the Stoics were really the leaders in spreading Christianity. Anyway, eventually the Romans adopted Christianity. Christianity became the religion of Europe and of the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire declined, but at least in the West. In the East, it continued under the Byzantine Empire, which was really Greek. Now, around 600, in the 600s, so there was another saint who lived, or a very interesting man named Mohammed, a holy man, who was not only a spiritual leader, but a military leader and a political leader as well. And he started this new religion of Islam, which eventually took over all of Arabia, and it spread across North Africa. It spread through warfare. And the thing is, Muhammad had, he didn't have the luxury of an empire for his religion to spread within. He had to create an empire, actually. And so Islam spread through war, across North Africa, into Spain, Portugal, and all the way up to France before it was finally stopped, into the Balkan Peninsula, the Middle East, into Central Asia, into India, and into what's now Indonesia and the Philippines. In fact, when the Spanish came to the Philippines in started the conquest in 1565 under Miguel Legazpi. The Philippines, or the archipelago that became the Philippines, was in the process of becoming Muslim. And then it was stopped by the Spanish conquest. And of course, the southern Mindanao is still Muslim, and an ongoing conflict between Christians and Muslims there in Mindanao. Okay, so we're moving toward around. And of course, you had these. Yeah, you had the Byzantine Empire, the Greek Empire, then the Muslim empires, which were growing. The last of which was the Ottoman Empire. And of course, again, China and India were both powerful, and the Aztecs and the Inca. Well, there were empires in America that we probably don't even know about. Okay, so fast forward, we're going into past about 1,000 years ago. And then things started happening in Europe, partly related to the Greeks, or inspired by the Greeks. And eventually 6 countries of Europe conquered the world: Great Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and Belgium and Holland. In fact, it was started with the Spanish and the Portuguese. Spanish Empire, a vast empire. And Spanish were, well, they didn't have democracy, they didn't have really a rule of law, but they were very determined people, strong-willed. One thing we forgot about was the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan. They have a bad reputation, but the thing is, what the Mongols did, they created a vast empire, including Russia and China. And it did a lot, even though, the Mongols they'd come into your town and kill the men, rape the women, enslave the children. But once the empire was established, you could travel safely within the Mongol Empire. And this guy Marco Polo traveled to China, Asia. He thought, wow, look at all this stuff. They have some cool stuff here. Silk and spices. Silk isn't that great, but it's kind of flimsy. But spices, foods are, people like to eat. We have to eat, and people like to have yummy food, and so these spices like pepper and nutmeg and so forth, and I don't know more. The more you know in history, the more you know you don't know. But anyway, they thought, wow, and these things, silk and spices, were being transported across the Eurasian landmass, very, very costly, very profitable for those along the way. And then some of these guys in Europe thought, wow, why don't we see if we can go to Asia by water? Yeah, and so this is the beginning of the countries, especially early on, the Spanish and the Portuguese, going to the oceans and traveling, trying to go to Asia to get into this trade, very profitable trade, silk and spices. And eventually this is how Columbus, unwittingly encountered America, and the isolation of North and South America was ended. And then, of course, this is a horrendous, unbelievable, maybe the greatest tragedy in world history. The deaths of more than 90% of the people in North and South America. Unbelievably tragic. We just beyond belief. Anyway, so the Spanish Empire was really first a huge empire, including what's now southwestern United States, into Mexico, Central America, most of South America, parts of the Caribbean, and all across the Pacific into Guam and the Philippines. And the Spanish and the Portuguese took Brazil, and then a little bit later, in the 1600s, the British got going, and the British became more powerful than the Spanish. They created this huge empire, and then their rival France had in what's now Canada, parts of of course later Africa. They were into India and the Caribbean, and so time was passing, and then later on, eventually, as I said, Belgium in the Congo in Central Africa, and the Dutch in Indonesia, very large country. So you had all these, almost the whole world conquered by these 6 countries, mostly the Great Britain and Spain, by far the most, and followed by France to some extent, Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands, these smaller areas. Okay, so and eventually we get to the Industrial Revolution, preceded by the Enlightenment, where people thought, we need to learn more. This is going back to like the 1700s in Europe. We need to learn more. We need to, and because in Europe, the Middle Ages, there'd been a lot of ignorance, and the Christianity had been problematic. The Catholic Church, which actually kept alive the teachings of the ancient Greeks and Romans, but they eventually became problematic. But people said, no, we got to learn more. We have to learn. And so this great desire for learning eventually led to the Industrial Revolution, which started in in England, in France, and the rise of the use of coal and iron, coal as a heating source and iron as a raw material to make steel for, well, eventually all kinds of things. And then, well, the first product, actually, if we back up a bit, one of the great motivations for the Spanish was other empires was sugar. Sugar was actually the first, when they'd gotten the silk and they were getting silk and spices transported, but they started growing sugar in the Caribbean, making a lot of money. Sugar really led to problems with people's health, and up till now, and diabetes and problems with people's teeth, and probably the dental career. And anyway, so the Industrial Revolution. Well, now back to the Industrial Revolution. We're getting into the late 1700s. And the first main product. This is the development of factories, and which require steel things and made out of metal, which has to be created through the use of coal as a heating source to turn iron ore into and other metals into usable steel. And so the first major product was textiles, cloth, and this was big business, and because everyone, after food, people like to have clothes, different types of clothes. This was a huge business following sugar. And so the industrial, eventually other things, and then, of course, the world changed so dramatically with the rise of factories and railroads, transportation revolution, railroads, and if we move into the 1800s. Now, by this time, the United States had become an independent country, and fought the British. They thought, no, we want to be on our own, and they won a war of independence. And the United States started developing, and it was on its way to becoming a superpower. And so as the 1800s passed, industrialization continued. Factory life, where things were, tough life. Guys, mostly from before, they'd been farmers, and then they were working in coal mines and these very challenging factory lives in cities. Rise of city life, more urbanization, and all kinds of things being made by factories, and railroads allowing people to travel on land. Before you could travel fairly easily on the water, but on land you'd be pretty slow by horse, maybe rivers if you were going with the current. But with railroads, wow, and you could transport a lot of things. Railroads really changed the world, and then the communication revolution started with telegraphs. Actually instant communication. In the middle of the 1800s, lots of things were going on. And then we get to, the railroads, they became one of the biggest businesses in the world, maybe the biggest in the late 1800s. And then we're getting up to, the first airplane flight. Just imagine, airplane flight. 1903, the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright from Dayton, Ohio, who had the first flight in North Carolina. Just imagine it. 66 years later, man went to the moon from 1903 to 1969. So the world has changed so much. So anyway, and the 20th century, of course, was very traumatic. We've had all this technological changes with airplanes and the Second World War, all these dropping bombs from airplanes, tragic. And the two world wars were horrific. And misuse of technology, where all this military spending and people, wars have become much, much more destructive. I met a guy from New Guinea once, and I said, they've had a lot of, New Guinea has traditionally had many small kingdoms and at war with each other. All over the world, kingdoms have been at war. Everyone has their self-interest trying to expand. And I said, well, how is the tribal warfare problem in New Guinea? He said, much worse, because now, they have like machine guns, so they can really, in the old days, warfare wasn't as much of a problem. So today's world, here we've gotten all the way up to today's world. We have the United States is very powerful, and I think a force for good, because what made the United States wealthy and powerful? Well, again, we were beneficiaries of Great Britain, because they had developed democracy and the use of reason. We need to use information and reason and logic, not just say, "Oh, we're going to do it. I have power. We're going to do it." Might. No, we have to get away from might makes right. And the thing is, with democracy, it requires respect. Very deep spiritual thing, and a lot of times you can see this is a problem today in democratic countries and all over the world. People have the lack of respect. So the United States had freedom of religion, which was very helpful, because religious warfare was real problem in Europe, persecution of the Jewish people. Jewish folks made a major contribution to the United States. Now, in today's world, China has become very powerful again, and India with their tremendous spirituality. And then you have Europe really devastated by the two world wars. Germany and Japan, both vying near the end of the colonial era to create empires, and both defeated. Germany twice, but revived. And now Germany is a powerful country in Europe. And, of course, Japan as well, just in the Second World War, has recovered and become very powerful. So it's an interesting world history, the different countries that have made contributions. And I think it's certainly a worthy topic. And, what we didn't talk about was I think I mentioned the Aztec empires, Aztec and Inca empires in America. There's so much more to learn. Now, Africa we didn't talk much about because, again, probably something to learn more about. I mean, when you get into a topic like this, you think, wow, what can I say about Africa? Of course, going back to ancient times, you had Egypt in the north, which was a great civilization. In fact, the Jewish people, as we know from history, were slaves in Egypt for a time, and Moses led them to freedom in Israel, back to Israel, to their homeland. And of course, and then the Jewish people eventually they were dispersed. They dispersed throughout Europe and in Russia, were persecuted. A lot of them moved to the United States, and then the Holocaust, where the 6 million Jewish people were killed in Europe, very horrifically tragic. And then that was a factor in the creation of modern Israel, which is having all this conflict with Muslim neighbors. Syria, Lebanon. Lebanon was like half and half, about 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. Now it's become mostly Muslim. A lot of the Christians have left Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, and so forth. So it's an interesting. There's always more to learn. We didn't talk about Russia, which is this massive country in the north, which the Cold War, when the United States in the 20th century, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, where Russia is very strange. Russia came out of nowhere to become this powerful country, basically through slave labor. And they had their communist agenda, promoting communist revolution all over the world, which was really, the United States opposed. A real problem because, communism is based on force and taking away people's freedom. And it all sounds good. Communist propaganda sounds really good. And actually, it's still influential. In the Philippines, I know they quote Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, who I read this, but Mao Zedong was perhaps the worst human being in history. And he's quoted in the Philippine Daily Inquirer as an authority figure. Not many people know about that because in China, even though China has become basically a capitalist country, but the Communist Party has a dictatorship in China. So that's a real problem. And they don't want, the Chinese government doesn't want the truth of Mao Zedong known, because this would diminish their credibility. They learned from when Nikita Khrushchev denounced Stalin, who was probably the second most evil man in history, the leader of the Soviet Union back in the 1950s. This weakened their power and probably led to the end of the Soviet Union. So the Chinese don't want the truth of Mao Zedong and how many millions of people that he killed in his ruthless quest to make China a military power, and his fomenting of the Korean War and Vietnam War. And the millions of Chinese who starved to death in China in the 1960s. Tragic. But of course, he died. Things are much better in China today. So it appears we're out of time. Before we stop, I'd like to greet the students of Restless Educational Center. I hope I get these names right. Jason Makop, Joaquin Parma, they call him Wax, Jasmine Faye Pay, Marin Mendy Dituco, Johannes Passis, Jontigo Fuliantes, Maymay Bayot, Mary Jane Lee, also known as Pim or MJ, and Miguel Nang. And congratulations to John T., May, Mary Jane, and Miguel, because they will graduate from high school soon. So good job. Thank you so much for your support and your fine comments, YouTube comments, you wonderful young people at Restless Educational Center, which is located on Allenby Street in San Juan, Metro Manila, Philippines. Allenby Street, named after General Edmund Allenby, the man the British general conquered Jerusalem in 1918 from the Turks in the First World War. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.